You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender. Last week, academics at Cambridge University announced they were setting up a centre to ponder the risk to humanity from so-called artificially intelligent machines that could one day outwit us. The Centre for the Study of Existential Risk will open next year and has been dubbed the Terminator Centre after the film series starring Arnold Schwarzenegger as a robot killer from the future. Hugh Price, the Bertrand Russell Professor of Philosophy at Cambridge, said advanced technology could become a threat when computers start to direct resources towards their own goals at the expense of humans. So, could artificial intelligence end up wiping out the human race? And if so, how? To help us answer that question, we have with us in the studio Dr. Marc Bishop, Professor of Cognitive Computing at Goldsmiths College in London, and Wendy Grossman, a technology writer and founder of the Skeptic magazine. And on the phone, we have Noel Sharkey, Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at the University of Sheffield, and Nick Bostrom, Director of the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University. So, if I may, I'll start with Nick Bostrom. What is the threat and how could it come about, Mr. Bostrom?
It's not so much that computers or current AI systems pose a danger. It's more that if progress continues, then at some point we might figure out how to build computers that have general intelligence, like humans do, and that match us in general cleverness. And then at some point after that, computers that are super intelligent. And I think anything that is super intelligent is potentially very powerful for the same reasons that humans are very powerful relative to other animals, because we are more intelligent, not because we are stronger.
Okay. Marc Bishop, what do you make of that?
Well, I kind of take the opposite position to Nick here, in that I think there's a very real and present danger now about AI systems that are fielded in the world. And I'm kind of sceptical about the notion that we'll build a general intelligence that will match human cognition in all its wonderful glories. The sort of danger that science fiction portrays of having robots and machines that match humans in all our capabilities, I'm a little bit sceptical of.
Okay. Wendy Grossman, artificial intelligence that does threaten the human race, could that happen?
I think there are lots of things to be afraid of. And I think one of them is that we will be stupid enough to build systems that we can't recover from. If we are not smart about how we build systems and we become too dependent on them, then we don't sort of build in recovery mechanisms. And I think that's actually really important. The other thing I wanted to say is I'm actually kind of more frightened by synthetic biology and some of the things that are going on in that line than I am by the prospect that my computer is going to decide to run the house for its own benefit rather than mine.
Okay, well, synthetic biology, we'll come back to that perhaps. Noel Sharkey, what do you think poses the greater threat? Actual robot consciousness or the malfunctioning of existing systems?
I'm not very worried about robot consciousness. Nick Bostrom, by the way, can be talking about very long into the future. And essentially, I'm a scientific skeptic. And what I mean by that is I'm a scientist. So I would have to say I just don't know, and nor does anybody else. I have no idea. I have seen no evidence to suggest that we're moving towards greater intelligence. There's a lot of talk about Moore's law, faster processing machines, great work in artificial intelligence. I really like artificial intelligence, but faster processing doesn't mean an intelligent machine in any sense. And one of the things about AI, certain parts of AI, there are many mysteries about mind and about consciousness, and in a sense, AI exploits those mysteries and then puts forward the notion that either you believe that everything can be computational, otherwise you believe in the supernatural. And it's not quite like that. Really, my biggest concerns are with the other two studio guests, Wendy and Marc, about the current applications of AI, which are very dangerous. And it's particularly dangerous when people don't give enough attention to the limitations and imagine that, it's all okay, machines are going to be so intelligent, we can let them do these things. And in particular, the military, which is something I've been working on for a number of years now in trying to get the United States and other countries to stop developing autonomous robot weapons because they can't discriminate between children, civilians, and combatants.
Okay, so Nick Bostrom, you're faced with some skepticism. But I would like to ask you how you think, can you give some sort of concrete examples, as it were, of how artificial intelligence could develop into a threat for humanity?
There are different paths. One would be by learning more about how the human brain works through computational neuroscience research, and then implementing similar algorithms and architectures in a computer. Other approaches takes more mathematical perspective and tries techniques that that don't have an exact analog in the human brain. And it's an open question which of those two paths will get to the destination quickest.
But what kind of, once that point is arrived at, what kind of decisions might this artificial intelligence make that would be detrimental to the human race?
Well, most possible goals a system could have would be incompatible with the survival of our species. So unless we engineer this hypothetical future superintelligent AI such that it would have goals and values that are consistent with human flourishing, then we could not count on us having a place in the future. I mean, we can look at just how humans treat other animals. We are in the throes of a great mass extinction event, and lots of species are being wiped out. Not so much because we hate them, but because we have other plans for their habitats. And I think that's the most likely scenario. If we succumbed to some form of machine intelligence, it would not be because it hated us, but because we are made of atoms, and those atoms could be used for other things than running human organisms.
Well, that's a good point. Would anybody else like to jump in on this?
I'd like to say that I think Nick might be conflating questions of epistemology and ontology when he claims that building and investigating computational neuroscience models of the brain help us instantiate a brain. Computational neuroscience is all about understanding mechanisms. It isn't about building brains.
Now, that was Marc Bishop. Wendy Grossman, any thoughts?
Not really.
Can I come back to
yes,
that?
Of course.
Because there certainly are people working in AI who are looking to draw inspiration from the brain, and indeed techniques like neural networks or reinforcement learning have been inspired by advances made by neuroscientists. Now, as of yet, we don't really understand at any adequate level how higher order thought is implemented in the brain. So we just can't import techniques from neuroscience into AI in more than these limited areas. But if and when neuroscientists figure out more, then the same computational principles that the brain uses, using an organic computing substrate, could then be implemented in a silicon computing substrate.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and we're talking about artificial intelligence. Joining me are Marc Bishop, Wendy Grossman, Noel Sharkey and Nick Bostrom. Wendy Grossman, you were talking earlier, I think, before we started this discussion, on the singularity moment, which is the actual time when machines, if it does indeed happen, sort of surpass the human race. Is there any... Nick Bostrom was saying that it's unclear when or if this moment might be arrived at, but what do you think about the actual timescale?
Well, there's a guy at Oxford named Stuart Armstrong who did a very nice presentation at the recent Singularity Summit, showing conclusively, I thought, that nobody has any clue when it might be, because he analyzed all the predictions of times that people have made that are in the database maintained by the Singularity Institute, and there was just absolutely no pattern to them. So you'd be asking me to make a random guess, which...
You might as well. Everybody else does.
Well, the usual interpretation is that people pick a time that is just on the horizon of when they might live to see it.
All right. So a lack of clarity there about when this could happen. But obviously some people do believe that it is a significant possibility. Otherwise, for example, this centre at Cambridge University would not be being set up.
Well, I think their remit is wider. AI risk is just one area. They will also look at other areas of existential risk, including synthetic biology that was mentioned earlier. I'd also like to make one point. So Stuart Armstrong, he's one of my research fellows, so I'm quite familiar with his work.
Yes.
And I think the lesson there is that because it's difficult to make accurate predictions about these things, it doesn't give one a license then to pick a random date and say, well, I might just as well believe that year as any other year, or to dismiss the possibility. But rather it means we need to think in terms of a probability distribution that is smeared out over a wide range of possible arrival dates for this new technological capability.
But I'd like to pull Nick up on a question that Noel raised earlier on, that where is the direct link between computer clock speed or processing power or memory size and intelligence?
I was going to ask that because there is this presumption, and I think it's a prejudice of very smart people, that the more intelligence you throw at something, the better your results are going to be.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of finesse that response slightly in that we can build systems that behave intelligently by having very, very powerful processors and lots of memory. For example, like the Watson program and machine translations tend to work by using large statistical techniques these days. But that isn't the same as building a computational mind or instantiating human thought.
So, Nick Bostrom, the question is, what is the link between processing power and actual intelligence?
Well, processing power would make it a little bit easier to achieve AI.
There's not many processing steps between input, if you think of it in these computational terms, which I don't, but between input of the human visual system and our sensorimotor outputs. So why are you drawing a correlation?
Well, I said it would make it somewhat easier because one of the things you can do with more computing power is to run more computational experiments on your new clever algorithms that you've discovered. The key thing that we're missing, of course, is probably the right algorithmic solutions. Now, it might also be that if you went the neuromorphic path, if you really tried to build an AI by modeling it very closely on the human brain, then you would need quite a lot of computing power just to be able to emulate the human brain. And we are not quite there yet, although we're getting closer. The human brain is quite a powerful computer. It's just massively parallel.
And at what level of analysis do you want to...
on what he means by we're getting closer? What's the evidence for closer?
Nick, what is the evidence for closer?
Well, I mean, we're getting closer to the end of the world, right? Like every day, by definition, we're getting closer to everything that's in the future.
What do you mean by closer to human-level brain processing? In what sense?
The computers are getting faster.
Yeah,
and so there's some amount of...
The question to you was, what's the relationship between processing speed and brain mechanism? And you can't say that it's getting closer to brain mechanism because it's getting faster in answer to that.
Well,
you're going around in a
because
circle
there's some certain amount of computing power that would be necessary if one wanted to run an emulation of the human nervous system. And I don't think we yet have that amount of computing power.
I think Nick's making what's called the first step fallacy here. Because we can do things with faster computers, we can build more interesting neural networks. We can get better computers to play better games of chess. It appears that just by having ever more powerful computers will inch towards human cognition and a full understanding of human intelligence. But I think he might be guilty of what Dreyfus calls a first step fallacy.
So Marc Bishop, how, in your opinion, how smart are today's computers?
That's a very loaded question. I think the meaning of a computation is in its use by humans, and so depending on the context, a small child might interact with a really simple calculator or simple toy and think it's really, really clever. A very clever professor of philosophy like Nick might interact with, say, a machine like Cleverbot, which is a system where you can have very impoverished conversations with a computational agent and think it very poor. So I think there isn't a yes or no, a right or wrong answer to that question, in my opinion.
Don't you think that the whole thing of something being clever is partly an effect of the observer? That, you know, if it does something unexpected and that you didn't think a computer could do, then it seems really clever and an astonishing thing.
Well, Ron Crisley, in an article called Inman Harvey, in an article called Evolving Robot Consciousness, wrote that one of the reasons we might ascribe intelligence to a system if we can't predict its actions, if the controller is so complicated that it isn't obvious even to its designer what it's going to do next.
It also seems to me that, particularly when you start talking about robots and things that move autonomously, that we're biologically wired to think that things that can move by themselves are more intelligent than things that can't.
The problem here is that I think that anthropomorphism and zoomorphism, which is attributing animal characteristics to robots, you can't help but do it. We're people as well, us researchers and scientists, and I think it infects us and it makes us talk about things like superintelligent machines and Terminators, which is kind of almost ludicrous in many ways when there's so little evidence for it.
Okay, so I think we're all broadly agreed that at least today, artificial intelligence hasn't evolved to the point where it is a big threat. But I do want to bring you in, Noel Sharkey. You mentioned Terminators. I mean, the military area is one area in which a lot of research is being done into robots, which don't necessarily make their own conscious decisions, which are directed by human beings and which can be used to kind of wreak death and destruction. And you're very concerned about this, is that right?
Yes, I am. Well, the idea of decision as well is it's a terminological thing, and the words like autonomy, they don't mean the same in computer science as they mean in the real world. A decision in a computer, for instance, is simply an if-then. So you could say to a robot, go to GPS region 4057, if heat signature detected, fire your weapon. That would be called a decision. So when people are talking about decisions, that's the kind of decisions. And I've been tracking the military now for some time, and there are massive plans afoot to develop autonomous robotic systems that can go out and kill for themselves. And this year, well, about 3-4 weeks ago, Human Rights Watch published a report called Losing Humanity, the Case Against Killer Robots. And between them and us, we're starting a massive campaign with a lot of NGOs to try and get international prohibition. Because one of the things is that there's massive proliferation of drone technology. We all know about drones and the sort of strikes the CIA are doing. And I don't want to put autonomous robots in their hands. But because of this massive proliferation, there's been no international discussion. The United States Department of Defense have only just released a document this week, about 2 days ago, partly in response to the Human Rights Watch report, giving guidelines for the use of autonomous weapons and how they're going to make sure they're safe. But what they're always blinkered, because what they're not thinking is the massive proliferation. China are developing autonomous air-to-air combat systems. Russia have the SCAT, which is an autonomous fighter. And people are thinking, oh, we'll put these regulations in place. But they're not thinking about how algorithms or programs interact when they meet each other. So there's no way that any of these countries who are developing these systems are going to expose their algorithms to each other, their attack algorithms. So when these devices meet, there's no way, it's unpredictable, it's very unforeseeable what will happen and what unjustifiable harm will come to civilians.
And like Noel, as someone who's worked at the coalface of AI for a long time now, it just terrifies me, the idea that we can get these, in quotes, scare quotes, autonomous systems let loose on the world. I can just foresee there's going to be a big problem happening in our lifetime. Never mind worrying about AGIs and machine consciousness. I think this is the problem that Noel highlights is very, very real, and we all ought to be concerned about it.
So what are the risks of such a clash of algorithms?
It's unpredictable. They could crash into a city, they could shoot people randomly. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. Yeah. But it's not just the clash of algorithms. There's no AI system on this planet, and I can't see it happening, that could discriminate between a civilian and a combatant. Unless they were wearing like brightly coloured uniforms or RFID tags. But certainly in this kind of insurgent, irregular warfare we have now, to send robots to pick out suspects and kill them is absolutely ridiculous. And then there's the principle of proportionality, where you have to decide that an attack against civilians can be killed with collateral damage, but you have to ensure that it's directly proportional to military advantage. There's no way for a robot AI system to do this.
And there's one thing I really want to come in here is if we look at the problems with automatic traders on Wall Street, the real danger is that with automatic warfare things can snowball out of hand. So we have some small incident incident that then grows and grows and grows automatically without human intervention. And that, I think, this is one of the very real dangers where we might face some kind of Armageddon, and we don't need to invoke science fiction notions of machine consciousness or AGI. We can just look at the technology that is being fielded now, and we ought to be worried.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and we're talking about artificial intelligence. Joining me are Marc Bishop, Professor of Cognitive Computing at Goldsmiths College, Wendy Grossman, a technology writer and founder of the Skeptic magazine, Nick Bostrom, Director of the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University's Oxford Martin School and Faculty of Philosophy, and Noel Sharkey, Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at the University of Sheffield. Nick Bostrom, do you have any thoughts?
Well, one risk, unfortunately, doesn't preclude the other. So near-term risks of some civilians dying here and there, or some losses to the financial system, doesn't preclude that decades down the road there might be a different kind of risk, an existential risk arising not from...
But Nick, there's a risk that Margaret Thatcher is sat in the room above me doing her knitting, but it's highly unlikely.
I can confirm she isn't there.
And I think the risk you're talking about, and people certainly who are working in AI, is the tiny minority of people who hold views to which you subscribe.
Well, that's why I think there is a sort of challenge at hand to try to bring better minds to focus on some of these longer-term challenges as well as the more near-term challenges we're facing.
Nick Bostrom, do you think in the scenario that you invoke of machine consciousness wishing to or just feeling like eliminating the human race, that they could in fact take over sophisticated weapons systems and infrastructure systems such as those governing the financial world and turn them against the human race?
Well, it's not so much the consciousness per se, but the general intelligence, which would enable the system to do everything that a human can do and more. So obviously the things you mentioned would be included in that, but presumably there might be many other ways in which a superintelligence could achieve its goals.
I think I'm with Marc. While we're worrying about what superhuman intelligences can do, you can do an awful lot of damage with things that are really stupid.
Yes.
And we've survived that kind of damage throughout human history and for as long as our species has existed. We haven't gone extinct as a result of ordinary human stupidity or tools.
We only have to look at what happened to the world financial system with the big crash a year ago, and that's just dealing with mere money. If we have automated weapons on the planet, the type that Noel's been warning us about, and if we have an escalation of automated warfare, then it does seem to me that there is a very real danger of serious damage to humanity.
But Noel Sharkey, do you believe that with advances taking place all over the world, it's all very well for Human Rights Watch to say we need to legislate this, but can it be done, or is the cat already out of the bag?
I think that various cats have been out of the bag. We've managed to stop cluster munitions. We've managed to stop landmines, blinding laser weapons, gas, dangerous gases, biological weapons, and so the idea is to form an international treaty of that sort, and that's what these kind of civil society campaigns can do. But let me just say in defense of Nick that I think I don't go along with the really strong AI position, but nonetheless, I think that he's right that these are mutually exclusive questions. I mean, if I really did believe that you could have superintelligence, I would not see where it would get its goals from to destroy mankind. In fact, I'd feel more comforted that it might be more discriminating if it was the case. And I'm a real science fiction fan. I've always liked science fiction, and I kind of like some of the stuff that Nick does, in fact, and I kind of like the discussions about AI, but I don't see them as real discussions. What I see them about is telling us about the human condition, and they're very good for looking at what we don't know. So if you're trying to simulate a brain and say, oh, a brain is just this, and you reverse engineer a brain, and I have no doubt that if you reverse engineered a brain, you'd find out that it wasn't super intelligent or that it wasn't conscious. And so then we'd have to ask different kinds of questions. So I think the kind of work he talks about and the kind of work this centre might do is useful from a philosophical perspective.
Nick Bostrom, do you think might there be a benevolent superintelligence emerging from technology?
That also might be in the cards. So it depends on how exactly it would be created and designed. So I think there would be some very difficult technical problems there in terms of the engineering of a motivation system that would be stable under iterative self-improvement, and that could make a superintelligence actually achieve something that would be humanly valuable. And I think it's definitely possible, but it might be extremely difficult.
Okay.
So Nick's arguing here that it's easier for a machine to be totally destructive and wipe out mankind than it is to engineer one that's benevolent. Is that asymmetry really exist?
Well, there's sort of more ways to... It's easier to destroy a television set than to build a television set.
Well, that may be the case, but we're going to have to wind up now because we've reached the end of our allocated time.
Just when we got warmed up.
Just as you got warmed up. I'm going to ask you all to make a sort of brief closing remark, and then we'll wind it up. So, Marc Bishop.
I'd like to conclude with an anecdote. Many years ago, I heard a guy called Hugo de Garis give a presentation at the University of Reading Cybernetics Department, and Hugo was working on the Japanese fifth generation project at the time and had a huge grant to build a robot cat. And I understand that he got the engineering right. They'd got a pretty good mechanical system all ready to go. And Hugo was saying, yes, we've built this massive hardware neural network. All I've got to now is wire the two things together, and hey presto, I've got a working cat. Well, that was about 5 years ago, and I still yet to see any video of such a thing walking around or doing anything remotely cat-like. Just having raw processing power and the mechanics alone is not enough to get intelligent behavior.
Wendy Grossman.
I think I will go with quoting the famous American comic strip Pogo, in which he said, "We have met the enemy and he is us." I think we're our biggest problem, not anything we've built yet.
Noel Sharkey.
Well, my biggest concern about AI is that it's always been subject to overclaiming and hyping and making the public think that it does a lot more than it does. And this does a great deal of disservice to the field. As Wendy pointed out earlier, you get people always talk on the corner of 25, 50 years, but the public and the funders start getting fed up with overinflated claims and stop funding our field, and that is a real danger. But the biggest danger to me is people believing these overclaims and going about developing weapons systems based on nonsense.
Nick Bostrom.
Well, I totally agree with Noel about the history of scientists making hype in AI, and then people and the media hyping that even more, and people believing nonsense. And I think that as a result of that, a lot of AI researchers have developed a kind of immune reaction to that, where they often refuse to think about the longer-term implications of current work because they don't want to feed this hype cycle. And that also can be a danger because it forecloses our ability to try to think in serious terms about these more radical capabilities that might be decades down the road.
Thanks very much. That concludes our discussion for today. I'd like to thank our guests, Dr. Marc Bishop, Professor of Cognitive Computing and Chair of the Society for the Study of Artificial Intelligence and the Simulation of Behaviour at Goldsmiths College in London, Wendy Grossman, technology writer and founder of The Skeptic magazine, Noel Sharkey, Professor of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at the University of Sheffield, and Nick Bostrom, Director of the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University's Oxford Martin School and Faculty of Philosophy. Thank you all very much.